King is finally breaking his silence on why he left Finesse2Tymes, and his side of the story is catching fans completely off guard. If you've been following these two, you know they once looked like family, but according to King, there was a lot happening behind the scenes that nobody knew about. Finesse2Tymes is also firing back with accusations of his own. Let me break it down. The departure. To understand why King left, you have to start with how he got there in the first place. FNG King, also called Lil King or Just King, is a young rapper from the Memphis area who went viral as a preteen for freestyles and songs like Glorilla Mode and Respect the Struggle. His videos leaned into street life, struggle, and a turned persona, and that persona is what put his name on the internet. He performed at festivals, including the Broccoli City Festival in 2023, and he shared a stage with Finesse at the Beale Street Music Festival in Memphis in May 2023. He also drew criticism for the content, cursing, guns, and grown themes at an age when most kids are in 5th grade. King's home life set the stage for all of it. His mother is Tiffany Moore, and she faced serious legal issues, including a 2023 arrest for allegedly stabbing King's grandmother. The grandmother became a court-appointed guardian. King came from an environment that Finesse and his supporters described as the streets, with danger and limited resources. By the time the drama peaked in 2024 and 2025, King was around 11 to 13 years old. Finesse2Tymes, real name Ricky Hampton, born in 1992, is a Memphis rapper known for a booming delivery, street anthems, and tracks like Back End, plus projects like the 2022 mixtape 90 Days and the 2024 album Art of War. He signed joint venture deals tied to Moneybagg Yo's Bread Gang and Jay Prince's Mob Ties. He also carries a heavy legal history. He served nearly 4 years in prison on a firearm charge, and he was on federal supervised release during much of the King saga, a detail that shapes almost everything he did in public. Around 2023, Finesse took King under his wing, positioning himself as a mentor, a godfather figure, and a de facto guardian. King moved into Finesse's home. Finesse promoted his music, performed with him, and framed the whole thing as a rescue. In his own words, Finesse laid out the intent when he first took King in. "It's been almost a year since I took him in. I knew you had potential. I never made $1 off this young man. It was never for the money. I just wanted to get him off the streets." At the start, the two sides matched. Finesse allowed the persona, the dice, the cursing, the club-adjacent energy, because in his framing, he understood where King came from. King kept posting. The name kept growing. For a while, the mentor and the viral kid were on the same page. There was friction before the public ever knew about it. In March 2024, nearly a year before the fallout went viral, King's mother called Child Protective Services, claiming she hadn't seen her son in weeks. Finesse responded in public and said the call was about money, not concern. That was the first sign that the guardianship sat on unstable ground, with the biological family, the court-appointed grandmother, and Finesse all pulling in different directions. Then the page turned. At some point in 2024, Finesse decided the grown man material was no longer okay for a child, and he tried to enforce discipline and shift King toward more age-appropriate behavior. That is the exact moment the two stories split. Finesse says he was correcting course. King says he was being erased. The tension built through the year, and eventually King was gone. King left Finesse's household around late 2024. By the time the public heard about it, he had been gone for roughly 4 months and was living with a new, unrelated female guardian. On December 24, 2024, Finesse went live and posted clips announcing King was no longer with him. The framing was that King ran away.
"King ain't been with me in 4 months.
Finesse said the reason was money, that he had stopped giving King cash and stopped taking him to dice games, and that King left over it. He wanted distance from anything King did next, and he listed it out.
King showing guns, smoking, throwing gang signs, shooting dice. None of that been going on around me."
He kept going, tying every one of those images to the idea that King was on his own. Now, Finesse also took partial responsibility. He admitted that he had once allowed exactly that behavior. He said it started with small allowances that he later regretted. Finesse also added a harder line about King's loyalties. He said it hurt to admit, but in his framing, King was loyal to money and opportunity rather than to people, and that he was trying to teach King that life isn't only about money. He said King had grown disrespectful with the adults in the house, and that when he pulled back the money and the dice games as discipline, King left. Image control and conditional support. If there is one grievance that sits at the center of King's entire case, it is this. He believes Finesse recruited a character and then tried to delete it. King was a viral street kid before Finesse. That was the product. That was the brand. And in King's telling, the moment Finesse tried to sand down the rough edges, the relationship was already over. King has hammered this point relentlessly. The version that spread the widest came in his fiery December 2024 response, where he flipped Finesse's discipline story on its head and reframed it as an identity war in his words. "Finesse came and got me for who I am, and then you're gonna try and change me for who I am. I am who I am. He insisted the internet knew him a certain way, and he pushed back hard against being painted as a bad kid, declaring he was actually a great person. The specific mechanism of that erasure, according to King, was the internet itself. He accused Finesse of keeping him offline, of throttling the very engine that built his fame. King said Finesse kept me off the internet and tried to switch my image up, framing it as a deliberate campaign to remake him into a quieter, tamer, more marketable version of a child. To King, that was not protection. That was theft of a persona he had already earned. Now hold Finesse's side up against that, because it is the mirror image. Finesse does not deny that he tried to change King. He built his entire public defense on it. His whole argument is that the grown man material, the dice, the clubs, the cursing, the guns became inappropriate for a kid, and that a responsible adult had to step in and pull the brakes. He even claimed measurable wins pointing to King's grades improving from a D to a B as proof that the discipline was working. And when King fired back, Finesse offered that now infamous, weary summary. I told y'all, I tried to change him my point, proving him done, and you have to understand just how blurred the early lines were, because that blur is the whole reason this became so combustible. The persona Finesse now wanted gone was the persona Finesse had once actively embraced. Remember, King's viral fuel was raw and grown. Freestyles like Respect the Struggle, where a boy who was reportedly around 10 was rapping about guns, violence, and street life. That was the product. That was what the algorithm rewarded. And Finesse himself has admitted in the plainest possible terms that early on he let it ride. The dice, the cursing, the club-adjacent energy, because he related to where King came from. So when Finesse flipped and decided all of it had to stop, King experienced it not as a parent finding his conscience, but as a business partner suddenly demanding a total rebrand of the very asset they'd built together. Finesse didn't just claim he wanted to change King for image's sake. He claimed the change was working, and working in the most wholesome way imaginable. He pointed to school. He said he'd watched King's grades climb from a D to a B, and he held that up as proof that the discipline, the structure, the boundaries were actually pulling a kid onto a better path. If you take that at face value, it reframes the entire control accusation. A man watching a child's report card improve is not the portrait of a manipulator. It's the portrait of someone parenting. Then, in July 2026, King handed the internet a brand new symbol for that entire fight, and it was almost comically small: the Spider-Man bed. In a clip that detonated across Instagram, TikTok, X, and YouTube, King listed being made to sleep in a Spider-Man bed as one of his reasons for leaving. He did not stop at the bed. He also complained, half joking, that the TV in his room was really small, piling a second tiny grievance on top of the first. And on its face, it is easy to laugh. A superhero bed and a modest TV are not exactly the stuff of tragedy. But look closer at what King is actually arguing, because the bed is not really about the bed. King has also claimed the support he received came with strings attached in his account, the designer clothes, and the money mostly showed up when he was useful, when he went to shows, when he performed, when he played his role. He described having to beg for things, and he even said Finesse didn't really care what he wore on stage. To King, that is not generosity. That is a transaction dressed up as fatherhood. In the swirl of King's accusations, there is a claim that Finesse took, or laid claim to, a $40,000 chain with references to paperwork and expensive jewelry tangled into the dispute. The details here are murky and contested. Even King has at points clarified that the pricey watch was a gift, but the emotional argument is crystal clear. King feels the material things were never fully his. They were leveraged, they could be given, and they could be taken. Drugs, guns, and high-speed chases. This is where the story stops being funny. Whatever you make of a Spider-Man bed, the accusations King leveled in December 2024 land in a completely different weight class, because they move from questions of taste to questions of a child's safety, and King did not whisper them. He said them straight into a camera, in a viral video that spread across every platform within hours. The core allegation is blunt. King claims Finesse had drugs and guns around him and shared them. In the video that lit the fuse, King accused Finesse of smoking with him and giving him narcotics, and said there were guns in the environment. King also tried to cut off the obvious counterattack before it could land, anticipating that Finesse would frame these claims as sudden, vengeful inventions. King insisted the behavior had been going on the whole time, and said there was video proof that Finesse had smoked with him, that this wasn't something King just started. In his framing, he wasn't revealing a new scandal. He was finally saying out loud what he claims was always happening behind closed doors. And then there is the moment that for a lot of people was the single most disturbing detail in the entire saga. King alleged that at one point he was in a vehicle during a high-speed chase, and that in that terrifying life or death situation, the adults around him weren't thinking about the child in the back seat. He framed it as a moment of pure disregard, that in the chaos of the chase, they didn't think about me. Whether you believe every word or not, sit with the image for a second. A boy, roughly 11 years old, strapped into a car moving at dangerous speed, allegedly fleeing something with grown men focused on escape, instead of the kid they were responsible for. King's accusations then spread outward to the whole household, and specifically to Finesse's girlfriend, known as Sugar. King alleged serious dysfunction in that relationship, painting a picture of a home that was volatile long before he walked out of it. He accused Finesse of conniving and abusive behavior and made allegations involving Sugar, including that she too was around guns. In the wider swirl of his statements, King described a relationship marked by cheating and tears, alleging Finesse cheated on Sugar and made her cry, while also claiming she carried some of the same habits he was accusing Finesse of. King even reached into the industry politics of it all, alleging that Finesse tried to steer his associations, that Finesse hated on Moneybagg Yo, or at least didn't want King getting too close to certain names in the Memphis rap ecosystem. On its own, a claim like that reads as petty gossip, but stacked into King's larger argument, it becomes another data point in the same pattern. Control. Control over his image, control over his internet, control over his money, and now, in King's telling, control over who he was even allowed to stand next to. To King, the guns and drugs were the dangerous end of the spectrum, and the money bag comment was the trivial end, but he framed them as branches of the same tree, a household where an adult was managing every lever of a child's life. And the drug thread specifically did not stay a one-off accusation either. It's worth pausing on the fact that King insisted this was a documented, ongoing reality rather than a heat-of-the-moment jab. He didn't just say it happened once. He said it was a pattern, that Finesse had been doing this around him the whole time, and crucially, that receipts existed in his framing. The burden wasn't even on him to be believed because he claimed the footage would speak for itself. That confidence, real or bluffed, is part of what gave the accusation its staying power. A child calmly asserting that video proof of an adult smoking with him exists is a very different thing from a child simply venting. It is worth noting that the Sugar name did not stay confined to King's accusations either. She surfaces again later in the timeline, in a very different and very official context. Finesse was reportedly arrested alongside a girlfriend referred to as FNG Sugar on drug-related charges in Texas. CPS, the smoke shop threats, and Finesse's probation collapse. The King saga did not just play out on videos and Instagram. It played out in Child Protective Services files, in a Texas police report, and eventually in a federal courtroom where Finesse stood in chains. Start with the very first legal tremor. Months before anyone had heard the word Spider-Man, in March 2024, King's mother, Tiffany Moore, a woman with her own heavy legal history, including a 2023 arrest for allegedly stabbing King's grandmother multiple times, called Child Protective Services, claiming she hadn't seen her son in weeks. Finesse did not treat it as a private family matter. He went public and torched her motives, insisting the call was really about money, that King wouldn't fund her habits. He defended the setup in stark terms, painting his home as the safe alternative to the streets. In his own words, Finesse fired back at the CPS call with a defense soaked in defiance. This young man lives in $1 million home with his own everything. Don't have to worry about dodging bullets or being hungry running around Memphis. He detailed the visits to King's grandmother, the $1,000 gifts they'd hand her each trip, and framed the entire complaint as greed dressed up as concern. That was the first crack in the guardianship. Biological family on one side, Finesse's household on the other, and a court-appointed grandmother caught in the middle. And the public, even this early, split down predictable lines, some urging Finesse to pursue real legal custody for the kid's stability, others insisting a mother's rights don't evaporate because of her past. The family drama had more voices in it too. Finesse's brother, known as FNG No Love, stepped into the public conversation at points, adding another layer of crew and family commentary, sometimes defending Finesse, sometimes contextualizing the split. Now jump forward to the incident that turned this from a custody squabble into a criminal case. October 23, 2024. A smoke shop in Humble, Texas, in the Will Clayton Parkway area. This is the single most documented physical confrontation of the entire saga, and it is worth walking through slowly because it happened with a car full of children present. According to court documents detailed in the reporting, King and his new guardian stopped at the smoke shop to pick up the guardian's grandchild with several other kids in the vehicle. Finesse was there, or arrived, and asked to speak with King inside. King went in, and then, moments later, the scene erupted. King reportedly ran out of the store shaken, shouting, "They trying to send me back to Memphis," and scrambled back into the guardian's car. The guardian claims Finesse and his brother approached the vehicle, that the brother said he'd upped that fire and tapped his waistband, where she says she saw the outline of a gun, and that Finesse himself hurled a chilling threat that she was going to die on camera today. She called the police, and suddenly the guns King had been describing in the abstract were allegedly right there in a parking lot with kids in the car. That report did not vanish. Months later, in late January and early February 2025, Texas authorities issued an arrest warrant for Finesse on charges of making terroristic threats tied to that smoke shop confrontation. The custody feud now had a warrant attached to it. Finesse's attorney came out swinging with a firm denial, insisting there had been no threat at all. And it is worth noting, in fairness to Finesse, that some coverage later indicated the terroristic threat charge was eventually dropped after prosecutors could not prove the case. But the damage to his situation was already spreading because Finesse was not a free man man in the ordinary sense. Finesse had already served nearly 4 years for a firearm conviction, and he was on federal probation throughout the King drama, a status that makes any new criminal accusation radioactive, any fresh charge, any failed drug test, and he risks going straight back to prison. Suddenly, his frantic public rush to distance himself from King's guns and dice imagery makes a colder kind of sense, and the probation dominoes fell hard. Finesse racked up violations, including documented positive marijuana tests in 2022 and 2024, and the new terroristic threats arrest from the King incident became one of the alleged breaches of his release conditions. In May 2025, he turned himself into federal authorities, and reporting even noted he might be heading back to jail over the King incident specifically. He appeared in court in shackles and chains. The mentorship that started as a rescue mission had circled all the way back to a courtroom. The legal pileup didn't even stop there. Into late 2025 and early 2026, Finesse was arrested again in East Texas on multiple drug possession charges, including marijuana and methamphetamine, and in at least one incident he was booked alongside his girlfriend, FNG Sugar, the same Sugar name that had already appeared in King's household accusations. Fan reactions and other youngins in the industry. For a story this messy, the audience never landed on a single verdict, and that split is a huge part of why this saga refuses to die. The interesting thing is where the sympathy actually pooled. On Reddit, the tone leaned toward respecting Finesse for owning his part. One widely echoed comment captured it. A user wrote that they respect Ricky for keeping it real and taking responsibility for his role in King's behavior, while hoping King could get back on track before it was too late. That thread barely criticized Finesse's discipline at all. It treated his public admission that he'd once allowed the dice and the cursing as a rare act of honesty in a genre where nobody admits fault, but the accountability crowd had a loud opposition. Across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook comment sections, plenty of people flipped the logic entirely and accused Finesse of hypocrisy. The sharpest version of that take pointed out the contradiction at the core of his story, that you can't let a little boy do all that, then discipline him for doing that, as one viral comment put it. To this camp, Finesse built the monster and then complained about the monster. He enabled the exact persona that made King famous, cashed in on the attention, and only discovered his conscience once the kid got too wild to control. Then came July 2026, and the Spider-Man bed flipped the entire mood from serious to comedic almost overnight. When King listed the bed as a reason he left, the internet did not reach for outrage, it reached for jokes. Major accounts ran the clip with crying, laughing emojis. One prominent ex-post framed it as King having social media laughing over the Spider-Man bed and the really small TV and turned it into a debate. Was Finesse actually wrong, or is a Spider-Man bed and a small TV just not that serious? That question became the whole conversation. A large share of commenters landed on ungrateful, arguing there's nothing wrong with letting a kid be a kid and making the best of what you have. Others used it as ammunition, proof in their eyes that if the bed was King's big complaint, then Finesse must have been doing something right. This concern for the kid actually predates the Finesse fallout entirely. It was baked into King's fame from the very beginning. Long before the Spider-Man bed, King's explicit content drew sharp backlash, with critics horrified at the sight of a boy who was around 10 cursing and rapping about killing opes. The recurring plea back then was practically a template for everything that came after, that the day grown adults sit back and watch a 10-year-old talk like that is a sad day, and that if people really wanted to help him, they'd get him out of that life and into books and sports. Defenders pushed back that King was simply showing what every kid in the hood is really thinking, and that the attention was keeping him alive and off the streets. Unfortunately, King's story rhymes so eerily with two other names the whole internet already knows, Lil Tay and Bod Baby. Lil Tay, real name Tay Tien, exploded into fame in 2018 at just 9 years old, posting Instagram videos from luxury cars and mansions, flexing stacks of cash, cursing like a grown adult, and even claiming she sold drugs. In one notorious early clip, the 9-year-old bragged that her sports car cost $200,000 and that she had no license but drove it anyway. It was jarring, it was viral, and it was almost immediately suspected to be scripted and directed by adults, often her older brother feeding her lines. And just like King, the money and the image sparked a war between the grown-ups. Lil Tay's parents and managers feuded openly over who controlled her brand and her earnings, with her mother reportedly fired from a real estate job after using company properties as backdrops. Critics called it one of the ugliest examples of child exploitation of the social media era. Then, after years of silence and a bizarre 2023 death hoax, Tay resurfaced and escalated everything, alleging long-term physical and emotional abuse by her father and stepmother and claiming she was fed rotten, frozen, parasitic, moldy food. The arc is painfully familiar. A very young child fed street and flex content. Adults fighting over the profits, and a delayed, disturbing reckoning about what was really happening behind the camera. Then there's Bahad Bubby. Danielle Bregoli was 13 years old in 2016 when a single Dr. Phil appearance made her a global meme, brought on the show by a mother describing severe behavioral problems. Her defiant catchphrase, "Cash me offside, how about that?" turned a troubled teen into an overnight celebrity, and the machine immediately monetized her. She pivoted into an explicit rap career as a minor, racked up legal issues as a young teen including grand theft auto and probation, and years later detailed alleged abuse at a troubled teen facility she was sent to, including claims she was forced to stay awake for days. Over time, the public narrative around her shifted from mockery to something closer to sympathy, from bad kid to survivor of adult and institutional failure. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.